Grant Blake, George Garzone, Danilo Perez. Can you tell me a
Oh
little bit about
yeah,
your some of the important lessons that you got from maybe also other teachers?
it's something I love talking about because it's going to take the rest of my life to like pay back that debt, you know? And I don't even know how I'm going to do it, but like
Hmm.
I'm not trying to say it's straight that the relationship with them was straightforward because it was not at all, you know. There was a lot of rebellion and insecurity and but I think at the time I didn't know that that's okay. I think it's a relationship, so it's going to be complicated. But with George, you know, I started studying with George. I had an amazing saxophone teacher from when I started the instrument when I was 11, and it's amazing to me how he was able to bring me into the fold of jazz, you know, in such a gentle way. And he was such an amazing teacher. And the most amazing thing about him is that when I got to like maybe 16 years old, he was like, you need to find another teacher, you know.
Hmm.
And I don't really know exactly why. I don't think it was because you know, we kept having lessons together, but maybe it was something about he wanted me to be exposed to something different, or I don't know. Also, where I lived was a bit provincial, and maybe he was like, this will be an excuse to get out and have experiences elsewhere. I don't know, but God bless him for having the, you know, I mean, just no ego to be able to do that, you know. And he had so much still to teach me, I'm sure. But so like I had a friend who was studying with Garzone going to Boston. It's like a 2 hour drive to get there to Garzone. And so I knew it was a thing, you know, I knew it was a thing. And I was very lucky that there's this jazz club. I mean, where I grew up, Pablo, I can't tell you, it's like to put this in context, like it was a very small city, you know, and like when I was growing up, like it's not the kind of place you'd expect this club to exist, but it was just by chance that this guy Paul Lichter, was another important like mentor figure for me. He's from Detroit and like found his way to Portland, Maine, and opened this club called Cafe No. I mean, you might have even heard of it from people like Ben. It was this like mecca of hipness that
Hmm.
shouldn't have existed in Portland, you know. And Paul was connected to people who were in New York and Boston. And then when Ben Street when he went to Boston and then New York, he was also kind of a conduit for these musicians. So Garzone was coming and playing with the Fringe at Cafe No. So I was
Hmm.
aware of him a little bit, you know. He liked coming to Portland and hanging out. And so I started lessons with him. And when I was 16, I started driving. My dad was driving me actually to Boston on the weekends, on Saturdays, to have lessons with him.
Hmm.
And it was just like from the word go, man. It was like it, there was so much. There was no question. Like there was no. Yeah, he just gave it all to me on the first day. You know. It was just like there was no initiation. It was and it was total trust on his part that it was fine to give
Hmm.
me all this stuff um you know, and I think because I was the age I was, he took the responsibility on, you know, to bring me into this stuff. And yeah, and I'm still working on it. Like during lockdown, I was getting more into practicing because I couldn't come to the studio, I couldn't work on stuff in the studio. And I went back to this sheet that he gave me on our first lesson, angular references, you know. It's
What?
2 sheets of A4, all eighth notes, just like his thing before. It was like an earlier version of what he's doing now. Um, and he was just like, read this. It was like an etude, you know, like learn it sort of thing. And I worked on it, well, hours and hours, you know. And then I went back to it during lockdown. I was practicing it again, and I just like dropped him a line. I was like, George, like, It's like, this is like, you know, a long time on. I've been dealing with the same sheet, you know? Yeah, I mean, there was no theory to it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
No theory. You know, there was no, and, you know, and George can do theory, you know, he's like a theorist in a way, you know, in his, but I think he was sensitive to the fact that I was not going to respond to like that level of abstraction.
Mm.
So it was just like, learn this sound, you know? And something about it made sense to me, probably because my understanding of harmony was so underdeveloped at that point that it wasn't weird for me to think about like dissonance. I didn't have a problem with that, you know?
Hmm.
So my playing got really out really early, you know? And also the stuff I was hearing at Cafe No, and I had these friends in high school who were a bit older than me, and they were into like very like out stuff, you know. They showed me Pharoah Sanders and John Zorn and Archie Shepp. Like, I knew a lot about that stuff before I knew a lot about some other more straight ahead stuff.
Mm.
So I hadn't necessarily made a distinction between that one was sort of acceptable and one wasn't. I just
It's a,
kind of
that's
didn't
perfect.
have a problem with that. Yeah, it was perfect. It was perfect. And but at the same time, George was also very rigorous in terms of like having me learn tunes. He was having me learn lots of tunes for every lesson, like memorize to be able to play the melodies, and hard tunes as well. And he was the first one who kind of impressed upon me that I needed to build up a repertoire, you know, and like really know the tunes inside and out. And that I was working really hard, and he changed around my embouchure, and
Mm.
it was just like so intense, like, and so thorough, you
Did he
know.
have any advice on how to build up a repertoire in that way?
He was just like, here's 5 tunes, you need to be able to play them for next time. You know,
Okay.
that's it. Like, and that was amazing. And I was like trying to find the recordings, and I couldn't always find them, you know. So, and I didn't have a real book. It was really hard to get a real book back then
Mm.
for me. I don't know what, it's just like, I don't know. I didn't know where you got it, and I thought it was illegal to have it. It probably is.
Mm.
So I didn't have a real book, and like, so I was trying to find this stuff out. It was so hard, man. And he was having me learn these really weird tunes.
Like what?
I was thinking about the other day, like Tones for Jones Bones.
Hmm.
What?
Okay. Yeah.
I couldn't get that record. Was it like
Yeah.
a Blue Mitchell record? I mean, how would I get this? Is like pre-internet.
Mm.
How
Right.
was I going to hear Tones for? There was no CD of it.
I mean, there's one
I was
record
so
by
lucky, man.
Chicoria, like Chick's record is called like that, right? And that's a song of
Yeah, but
his,
that
I
was
think.
after the Blue Mitchell one, was it? It's
I'm
very
not sure.
obscure.
Yeah.
It was like,
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, I couldn't find either because what was I going to do? It's like I was, you know, I didn't know, you know, eventually this is another like total blessing in my life. There was a record shop, again, like disproportionate. Maybe where I grew up was actually hipper than I think, but it's, there was also a record shop called Amadeus Records. It was mostly classical music, but the guy who ran it had incredible taste, and he stocked a jazz section that was like selective, but very, very hip. Like,
Mm.
um, and back then, you know, stuff was just starting to make it to CDs, so it was hard to find. You know, the only stuff was like Miles Columbia and Duke and like the obvious Blue Note records, but it was before they had kind of like started getting all that stuff on the CD.
Mm.
So it was difficult to find that stuff, you know? It was very hard. And this guy Jim was such a great guy. Like, once he got the sense that I was like buying this stuff, he would be like, do you know about this and that? And of course I didn't, you know, I didn't know anything. So he started making me tapes. Can you believe it? The guy at the
Mm.
I still listen to these tapes, man. I was listening to one the other day. He knew I was into Sonny Stitt, so he made me a tape of all these Sonny Stitt, you know, he made me a tape of Sonny Stitt and Sonny Rollins and Dizzy Gillespie. I
Yeah.
had not heard that. I was listening to all this 70s Sonny Stitt. He was like, man, have you heard Sunny Side Up or whatever? I was like,
Yeah.
you know, he made me a tape and like super detailed annotation, who's on the personnel, the date, where it was recorded,
Yeah.
you know. And so he started being like my source for rare Blue Note stuff. He had all this stuff at home on vinyl and he started lending it to me. So I think
Wow.
he's the one who got me some of those recordings so I could learn the tunes, you know. So I was like building up repertoire that way, and it was so exciting having to do that hunting
Mm.
to access it. This is something that like I feel like I can't even explain this to people now who are learning jazz now, like
Yeah.
how, and it was probably a little easier there too, maybe because like I remember going to Germany in like 99 or something. The first time I went to Europe, 1999 or 98 or something, and going to this record store in Munich and like finding all these Miles records that I didn't even know existed, you know?
Hmm.
I was like, how are these here? This is like American jazz. And by that point, I had started shopping at record stores in Boston, you know, after my lessons in Georgia, I was
Yeah.
going to Tower Records and whatever. I remember I went to this place in Munich and they had Miles, the concert with Sam Rivers, the quintet with Sam
Hmm.
Rivers. I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah.
And I was like, how am I here in Munich? Like, and the record store has this record that like, so I think they were better stocked, actually.
Hmm.
There were those imports and Japanese imports.
Yeah.
So I had no access. And it's so funny now to think about like that you could just go on YouTube and find any of that stuff. And that's amazing. But there was the pleasure of the hunt, you know,
Right. Yeah.
to
I
like
remember
track
that
these
too.
records down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was beautiful. And I feel bad for people who don't have to do that now because I really there was there it was like a little less controlled, like something would come into your life. Or I was talking to somebody the other day about how my friend Anders about how you'd know about a record for so long before you actually were able to hear it,
Yeah.
you know,
It
so you
connects
build up
you.
this expectation.
Yeah. It connects you to the music so much more. It's more
Yeah,
emotional. It's more personal.
it's really funny.
Hmm.
Like, and I thought of this fun project which would be to like try to record the record, like, you know, if that ever was able to happen again. And it was like, you know, to make the music that you know that you're imagining that record sounds like. I
Wow.
remember
Yeah.
there was a Larry Young Unity, you know that record, of
Mm.
course. Like I got that like was on CD, and then I found out about the one with Sam Rivers, and it was like driving me crazy. I can't,
Yeah.
and Grant Green maybe. I can't remember who else was on.
I
It
think
was
it's
driving me
Elvin.
nuts. Like yeah.
Hmm.
Can't remember now what it's called, but anyway, that record, like knowing about it, was just driving me crazy. Like
Yeah.
I needed to,
Yeah.
and I was obsessed. I think on the back of those Blue Note records, you could read about the other releases, but it was so frustrating that you couldn't. So that one, I was just going nuts, man, and like for months, maybe years, just like obsessing about what that band sounded like. And then I think I got it, and it wasn't even like it's good, but I should probably go back to it. But of course, it was going to be a letdown because I'd built it up
Sure.
like
Yeah.
crazy, you know. But I thought it'd be a funny project to like try to make a recording of what you think it sounds like,
Yeah.
you know, like try to make that recording. But anyway, that guy at that record store, you know, it's just like gave me so much, and it all meant a hell of a lot
Mm.
because um, and George sort of like led me toward this stuff with some of those tunes. I mean, there were standards as well, but he would throw in these weird ones, and I wonder in retrospect if it was sort of if he was trying to like kind of set me on the trail a little bit.
Mm.
But yeah, that was it still is such an important relationship, man. It's like I feel very lucky that I had that, you know. And then he brought me into the New England Conservatory thing, despite the fact that I was not ready in a lot of ways. And and again, you know, a tribute to like his maturity. Once I got there, he was like, "You don't have to study with me," you know. Like, I don't think his expectation, he knew that Bergonzi and Danilo, all these other people. So he was very like generous. And actually I ended up studying with him anyway for a lot of it. Um, but you know, it was like, again, he could have been very controlling about that and been like, I'm going to keep you
Yeah.
like, and it wasn't like that at all, you know.
Mm.
It was just he brought me into the fold there, and then I made these other relationships that were so important. You know, Danilo being one of the big ones for sure. You know, when
Yeah.
I first got there, yeah, yeah.
What are your memories
He
of
was.
his teachings?
I mean, they were just those what lessons were absolutely wild. Like he was so lit up. Um, I think he was at an interesting point in his life because he was really young when he got that job. You know, and also on this, he was in transition in his career. I think, like as an artist, like he was discovering lots of stuff, and he brought it in like hot off the presses. You know, everything he was experiencing, he was like, right, this is what we're working on now. You know, I
Hmm.
remember he made this recording with Tom Harrell and Dewey Redman, and he was like playing us the like roughs of it. He was like about Dewey, you know, the way Dewey Redman was playing. He's like, and like he was like, this is what we need to deal with now, and like
Yeah.
we need to work on Dewey Redman, you know. And then he'd go off and do something to somebody else, and it was all so current, you know.
That's nice
It
and
was all
very
very, very
inviting
current.
for the students, right? I mean,
Oh,
if the
so generous,
yeah.
so generous. Yeah, yeah. Because there were other teachers, of course, who keep their powder a little drier, you know, be like, well, my professional thing is what it is, and or they might have been shy or worried that students wouldn't relate to it, or there's lots of
Mm.
reasons. But his thing was just like wide open, you know. It was like, and he had a lot of stuff he was working on, and he was just like, let's work on this, you know. Like I
Mm.
remember Tristano, he was he was into Tristano when I first started studying with him, and he had me like learn all those Tristano solos from that record, New York Improvisations. It's transcribe them all and learn to play them all, man. It's like that was a heavy experience, like big influence,
Mm.
you know. And then it was Wayne. Then he got the gig with Wayne, and it was all about the way that band was rehearsing and telling us about that, and it was just incredibly exciting, like
What did
having
he tell
access to
you
his.
about the rehearsal process?
Oh, I mean, you know all the, you heard all the stories, right? It's like Wayne was actively trying to, it seemed like, create a totally bewildering situation, you know. I mean, he was taking these musicians who were absolutely rock solid in their understanding of what they did, and he was trying to bring them back to square one, you know.
Mm.
I mean, I just read an amazing little essay by Jason Moran about him playing that gig, and it was the same
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
It's like Wayne saying something about, you know, I don't compose, I decompose. He's just trying. It seems like he, with that band, he was always trying to get people to work from a place of total unknowing, you know. And that's what, you know, I think Danilo was, you know, it was about that, like shaking it up
Yeah.
and working from a much more kind of immediate position where there are many more possibilities than if you're working within a kind of known idiom or whatever, you know. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you know, like I say, complicated. It's like a jazz program that has all those sort of little cultural uh dysfunctions in a way,
Hmm.
and differences of opinion, and it's an institution, and so it was a live issue learning music there. But and I and that was stressful at the time, of course, but in retrospect it made it richer because we had a lot to um we you know, we were trying to approach it critically and probably went too far, you know.
Mm.
We rejected probably more of what was on offer than we should have, than I should have.
Hmm.
I say we, I mean I had some good friends there, and Um, for example, George Russell, like he's somebody who I think about now, and I wish I had been mature enough to just accept what he had to offer, as a teacher. I was freaked out by the cult around him,
Yeah.
So I was like, you know, I was just I was intimidated, and I for that reason I didn't get as much out of that experience with him as I could have. That's a great one for like the Robert Cohen. I wish I could go back and do that George Russell stuff
Yeah.
with knowing what I know.
Right.
But I got, but that said, playing in his bands was like a major learning experience as well.
Mm.
Yeah, playing that repertoire, and he was so scary and hard on us about it, and yeah, some of the most challenging music I've ever played. That George
Why?
Russell stuff.
What was so challenging?
Oh, so hard. I mean, I wasn't a very good reader to begin with, I could
Mm.
barely read. I'm still not amazing, but then I've come into university, I could barely read in a lot of ways. And he's putting these charts in front of us, like Stratus Funk and all this stuff, like um, Manhattan Rico, just like all this, like really hard and
Mm.
really fast. Like the tempos were insane, and I didn't quite understand what he wanted us to do in the solos. Like I was aware of the Lydian chromatic concept and that should somehow relate, but of course I didn't understand it. I hadn't
Mm.
studied it, but actually all he really wanted us to do when it came down to, he just wanted us to go nuts. Like he wanted energy.
Mm.
I don't think he was that concerned about. He always lit up when we would like go crazy.
Yeah.
I think that's what he wanted.
Mm.
But interesting guy. But that music was, yeah, it was really hard to know how to play it. And I bought all the records and I was listening to them, and I don't think he actually wanted a recreation of those. I think he wanted something else.
Yeah. Just to work
Yeah.
on that music a little bit more. Find some new
He
things
saw it
in.
it was alive for him. I
Mm.
think those pieces had a life of their own by that point. That's the sense
Mm-hmm.
I got. And so, the recordings of them from the 60s were like the touchstones, but I think he, as far as he was concerned, we were bringing, the composition was already alive and we were just sort of like participating in it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So that was really amazing. Mind you, like that was my first year. I was 18 years old. I mean, I had no idea what was going on. So way in over my head
Mm.
in a great way. I mean, I'm talking about all of this stuff because like I say, it's just, um, I can't like express enough like how, it's the most important thing to talk about in a way, I think,
Mm-hmm.
what other people made available to you, either as teachers or through recordings, like how do we repay that debt? Like, you know,
Yeah, I feel
it's
the
something
same
I think
way.
about a lot.
Also, if um, I feel even like we have had the opportunity to learn from certain people either by having lessons with them or having played with them or having hung out with them. I think we owe the other people who haven't had that opportunity to pass on the what we've learned from them. I mean, this is also why I'm doing these interviews, Um,
Mm,
in a
mm,
way, you've been you have had certain kinds of experiences, and now it's time to share them with others so others can appreciate and learn from them. You know, whenever I get asked about how was it like to play with such and such, sometimes people don't ask that question because um, it's obvious to ask that question and they feel like you don't want to talk about it. because you get asked that all the time, right? So because I've done a tour and a recording with John Scofield, sometimes people ask me about that, and sometimes people say before they ask me, they're like, "You're gonna get probably asked this all the time, but what was it like to play with him?" And I always feel like, man, I'm down to talk about this because it makes me relive that experience again, and it makes me and by sharing it with others, it's not just me having that experience, it's somebody else having that experience also, because when we relate, part of that experience jumps onto the other guy, you know? I really like that. So now you talking about those lessons, I felt like I'm in the lesson too.
No, that's
And
good.
and that's
Yeah,
maybe
that's good.
one way to pay back that debt, I think. You know,
Yeah.
makes me appreciate certain people or certain experiences that you have had and view those persons in another light. I think that's powerful.
It is powerful. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Can
heavy. Teaching relationships are so powerful.
um, I'd like to go back to Rainbow uh, and something that you've said earlier, that certain pieces or stuff from the past keeps on working throughout time. I'm wondering how those pieces keep evolving for you. Do you sometimes go back to them and play some of them, and or if not, how do they evolve for you if you don't even play them?
Yeah, no, those are, I would never probably ever play those again. Yeah, those are
Mm,
pretty much, I don't think I'd ever want to play those again, you know. Um, I'm kind of happy with those just existing as recordings and forever like that. And I have played them live a bit. I mean, um, with Kit, we played a couple of those around the time that it came out, maybe. And that was cool. It felt good to play them live. Um, I mean, I'm not really one for going back to old repertoire. Really, I think I just for me it has a fairly limited lifespan,
mm,
especially once I've recorded it. I have a kind of backwards. A lot of people, the recording is the begin is the well, I don't know. I don't know.
I know what you're about to
Actually,
say.
that's maybe not true. I mean, there's two different ways, right? It's like you can record it and that can be a starting point, or
Right.
the recording can be the end point. I mean, for me, it's both. I think I had a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun playing music that I've recorded already with other people and playing it with other people, and that's felt good. Um, the stuff on Rainbow was never. I never even had a thought of performing that stuff. So really, I mean, with the exception of the last track, which was actually written to play with a band before I made that record, most of the others, would be very difficult actually to play live because they're kind of based on sort of like very specific musical situations and constructed and not in real time, you know.
Hmm.
And so I think it would be a little bit frustrating. Yeah, I would rather write something to play probably than revisit that stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
you can tell me a little bit about the process of putting together an album like that, or also reality or stuff like that, where
Yeah.
it's mostly layered on top of each other, and it's all
Yeah.
you, and it makes perfect sense, and it's so unique. And I feel like, where do you start? I mean, with some of
Where
the
does it
songs,
start?
yeah, where does it start?
Mm.
Does it start with composition per se, or is it sometimes also you just start recording and build on top of that? Or um, yeah, maybe you can talk me little bit into about the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's pretty inconsistent. I mean, despite the fact that they're all sort of the outcome of like multi-track recording, I've used it in pretty different ways, and in my mind, it's pretty different, you know, like that Rainbow record, was, I recorded those really, really slowly, and was pretty, detailed with how all the parts were recorded and how they fit together. And a lot of those started from things I was doing on piano on Fender Rhodes, and actually that record is, a lot of the stuff on that record, started with small ideas that kind of developed. I was going for a lot of walks around that time, so just kind of thinking through things to the point where I felt like I could pretty much, it was just a matter of recording. By the time it got, you know, so that I pretty much knew how I wanted like 70% of it to sound. And the other 30 came about just through having fun with recording, being like, oh, you know, maybe this needs to be here, and kind of understanding what it needed to be, and then going probably overboard with that. Reality was very different. So that one was all based upon melodies. Almost all of them were melodies that I came up with through practicing saxophone. And I was trying to write stuff that I could play solo. So those were all written to be solo pieces.
Yeah.
So that all of those started with melody. Yeah. And then, so I was composing basically from the top down.
Yeah.
And trying to think about, you know, and the idea with the majority of those was that it would just be a melody that I repeated over and over again and embellished, with other instruments, you know, improvising. So it was much less composed, actually. It was much more about just recording responses to that melody, to the repeated melody, and having those responses be the arrangement. I mean, I'm trying to think if there's any exceptions to that, but I think that's pretty much the way all of those go. You know, it's just a repeated melody that's embellished. And, you know, the record that I just finished is like,
whoa, that's good news.
Yeah. So I just finished a record, that a lot of that stuff is taking that approach further by just basically improvising. And there's some stuff on there where I am recording and it's totally improvised, and then all of the subsequent overdubs are responses to that. So it's basically free improvisation, but it's all me.
Yeah.
And that feels like a natural extension of what was happening on those other records. I mean, this new record, there's also a fair amount of very constructed stuff as well. It's kind of a mixed bag because it was recorded over a long period of time.
When will you release it?
I think it's gonna be summer. Yeah. Yeah, this summer.
Oh man, looking forward to hear it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
How is this development for you? How did it happen in terms of collaborating with people and then deciding, okay, there's stuff that I have to do on my own, and really getting a personal approach to that, because it doesn't sound like, okay, here's a loop station or whatever, and I'm gonna play on top of that. You know, it really. I think you're very creative with the medium of recording by yourself and doing it on your own, because I feel like you have a certain, you have a very distinguished sound on all of those instruments that you're using. So the palette keeps on growing, but it sounds like sometimes it's a weird thing sometimes hearing the same saxophone player play two different lines. It has a funny feeling sometimes. I know, I'm not sure if you know what I mean. Having the same sound playing sometimes in unison, or that can have a funny feeling for me, you know.
Oh yeah.
But with you,
Yeah.
it
It's very
feels like,
odd. Yeah.
yeah. But with you, it feels right. It feels right.
Oh,
Um,
thanks, Pablo.
and yeah, because maybe it has been a long development for you to go in this direction and
Mm.
perfecting it to a certain point. So I'm wondering, how did you, yeah, where did it happen that where you felt, okay, I think I have to do things on my own?
Uh, it was kind of a natural progression. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was any one moment when I decided that was how it was going to be. I mean, when I was in college, my friend Elliot and I, who's a great musician, Elliot Krimsky, he goes by he goes by his own name now, and he also had a band called Glass Ghost. That is amazing. But we are very good friends, and we're living together in college, and we bought a 4-track. Actually, I still have it. I want to show it to you. Actually.
Yeah.
This machine, this one, this is like, I can't throw this away because it's the one we bought in 1996
Sure.
at Guitar Center. We split it, so half of this still belongs to. We'd have to like negotiate who got to use it when.
Yeah.
So I got one of these with one of those mini disc microphones, the Sony, which are amazing. They're like electret condenser microphones, battery operated mic, and we started making stuff on 4-tracks, just messing around. And I immediately like a lot of people probably, like, that just lit me up immediately. I really related to that way of working, just on a pretty like natural level, because I just was so excited by being able to make music, by myself,
Hmm.
and that control was really like thrilling, like being able to control every aspect of the production, and just all of it. And the sound was so interesting, like starting to learn about getting different sounds. And we were doing this in our bedrooms, and I remember getting really into learning about how things sounded in different parts of the room and where to put that one mic. And so I love doing that. And I got into some weird stuff listening. I was listening back to some of the stuff the other day, and I was doing things like taping the radio and doing all these overlays. Kind of like they're kind of like minimalist pieces. I mean, I had no idea what that meant, but I, in a naive way, was kind of like, what would happen if I like took this little excerpt from the thing I recorded on the radio and repeated it over and over again, and then overlaid it as really out stuff, But I listening to it, I really, really like it. So I was doing all kinds of stuff like that just for fun, and I didn't in any way associate it with my main thing, which at that point was playing, jazz with my friends in Boston. And I didn't even share this stuff with them, I don't think. I
Hmm.
think I would have been pretty self-conscious about that. But Elliot and I were doing a lot of it. And then I remember, like, at New England Conservatory, you have like these final, can't remember what you call them, but like when you present like your final kind of thing, your
Recital.
work. It's not, well, we had a recital, but we also had this thing where we had to like present recorded examples of things we've done, like, as it was like a final sort of like jury or something. I don't know what you call it, but
Hmm.
anyway, I was trying to think of what I wanted to do, and and then I decided, I was like, what the hell? Like, I'm going to bring in one of these tapes to show them. At that point, I was like, I just didn't care,
Yeah.
I was so confused about what I did and so disillusioned about like jazz and all that stuff. Like, I was just like, I'm going to bring one of these tapes. And they were like, wow, that's cool. They kind of validated it for me, which I remember Garzone might have been there too, or maybe it was Jerry Bergonzi. It was like these people who I was like kind of nervous what they would think. And they were like, yeah, it's cool. It's like, and Alan Chase, who was the head of the program, was like, have you heard this, this and that, and like other things that it reminded him of. So I think that was the first time it sort of like validated it for me in a way. And again, like I'm very thankful for them not just like totally rejecting it. And so I think that made me feel like maybe it could be a thing. And then when I moved to New York with Elliot and those guys, like I just kept doing it, It was like the thing that really filled me up because I was struggling with like playing sessions and stuff. It was like very disheartening for me when I got to New York.
Why?
And trying to survive. And I just like New York was a very I mean, this is going to take us somewhere else, but like, so I moved to New York like at a very like delicate time, like right after September 11th. Like right after. Like I took a sublet, which was Jorge's old room in Bill McHenry's house on Adelphi Street, which is like this historical so many people have been through this place. Like actually it wasn't Jorge's room, it was a room upstairs from him. Living with Bill McHenry for that winter. And then I moved back to save up some money, and then I moved again to Sunset Park, Brooklyn, a little bit further south. And I was just like trying to play sessions, but at the same time also like going out to all these other kinds of gigs and discovering so much music. And I mean, it was a really exciting time to be in New York, I have to say. I know everybody always says that, but that time, like, I heard a lot of great music, but I wasn't connecting with the scene that I moved there to check out. That was the irony, because I knew about, through Ben Street, I knew about like Kurt Rosenwinkel and Mark Turner and, Myron Walden and Brian Blade, all those guys that like small scene. I moved there, but I missed the boat because by the time I got there, I mean, they were still playing in town a bit, but by that point they had already sort of left.
Yeah.
So I was like, what do I do? Like that I wanted to,
You wanted to experience that.
Yeah, I wanted to be in like Smalls mid 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. Time
And Smalls
again.
was still amazing. Yeah, exactly. Smalls was incredible back then, as I'm sure it still is. Incredible musicians and the feeling of it. And I was going to the Vanguard all the time, I was going out a lot to see jazz and hear jazz, and I heard some amazing stuff. But somehow I thought I would like connect with that scene, and I was just it just didn't happen. I mean, the way I imagined it would, and instead I was going out to hear all these. I got this job, awful job that I was eventually fired from, working this place, Mama's Kitchen in the Lower East Side. And it just so happened that like a lot of the people who worked there were like on this scene of like experimental music and disco and house, like. And I had a friend from high school who was also like an avid record collector, and he worked at a store called Other Music. And he and a lot of those people were friends, and they were taking me to gigs like of stuff that was not jazz, and that was just like blowing me away. A really exciting moment for music, like experimental music and electronic music. And there was a bit of crossover with things that I knew about. For example, at this club Tonic, which was like an offshoot of the Knitting Factory, they were having gigs there that I remember being pretty amazing. But I was going to see these bands playing in venues and parties, and it had nothing to do with jazz, but it felt really inspiring and exciting. So it left me in this weird position where I'd moved to New York to have the like traditional jazz initiation into that world, and it wasn't happening. What I was actually being initiated into was a totally different thing.
Yeah.
And so I I had no center basically with my practice.
Mm.
And so the way that I eventually decided I was going to, or didn't decide, but the way it was easiest for me to resolve these like inspirations was through recording by myself, because I didn't have to. It was very clear to me in that context how I would bring things together,
Yeah.
because I had all the control to work with the sounds,
Yeah.
and it's and and so when I made that Horses record, that started as recordings on this 4-track.
Yeah.
And
Do you still have them?
and yeah, oh yeah, I've got those demos, yeah. And the idea was to release those, And at the time I was playing a lot with this guy Luke Temple. He had a band called Here We Go Magic. He's an
Yeah.
amazing musician. And I was doing a lot with him and touring with him, and he had this record deal. He got a record deal to make a record out in Seattle for a label called Mill Pond. And I went out to work on that record with him in Seattle, and I played the demos to the guy, Mike, who owned the label. He was like, let's do a record, like a proper record of this music. And so I had this opportunity to record that music in this incredible studio over the course of a week with a great engineer, and just like I've never done it since.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the first and last time. Yeah. And so I don't know. And then after that, it was, I don't know. Yeah. And after that, I just kept returning to the multi-track thing as like a center, basically.
Yeah.
Even when I was playing with a lot of people, it felt somehow like an authentic way for me of being able to do music that felt like it was mine. I don't know why, and so, and it's still the way I love to work. I love coming in here and just like messing around,
Yeah.
and I love performing. I love playing with other people too. And I've actually realized that even more now that it's been taken away. Like, I
Mm.
just like, that's because when lockdown started happening, I was like, okay, like, well, if I can get to the studio, it's fine. Like, I'll
Yeah.
make like a few records, great. But actually, like, the energy for me that fuels that stuff that I do here, I think I realize now that it comes from playing with people. I can't take it out of the equation. I think
Yeah.
they fuel each other.
Right.
And I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way.
Totally.
I
Yeah.
think I'm probably more okay than some people working on my own, because I do it the majority of the time. But I think I don't take for granted how much I need input, and playing is still like so central,
Mm-hmm.
Um,
When we before uh, just briefly touched on the concert we played together, you had a very strong reaction to that. And
yeah, yeah,
maybe you can tell me where that came from. Yeah, what you think about, because I think about that concert quite often actually, but I hadn't listened
really,
to the
yeah.
recording for quite a while. But yeah, the days leading up to this, I was also going back to that, and
Mm, mm,
yeah, it was so great to hear you in that context, and because I mainly heard you in the context of Rainbow and those kind of records,
mm,
and
mm.
therefore the desire to play with you grew inside of me. So I asked you to come to Cologne, and it was so great to hear you with Jorge and with Matthias, and to get to play with you. But I'm wondering what your perspective of that concert was.
I mean, it was a great experience from the perspective of I don't do that much. Um, like, play with musicians I don't know, for the first time on the gig. Like,
Hmm.
I know that's a convention in jazz, certainly from a career point of view, but and it used to be a big part of what I did, but these days I don't do it much. And I think there's a skill set that goes a lot, that makes that easier, or that makes it feel less intimidating. It's like a general skill set, you know, in and it's that skill set's partly musical and it's also partly personal, you know. And that gig was an interesting opportunity to realize that I don't have those skills. You
I
know what I
didn't feel
mean?
that
Like,
at all, man. I didn't feel that at
oh,
all.
listen, I'm not trying to put myself down at all.
Mm.
This is in no way, you know, it's fine. And it was fun for that reason. It's interesting. It was interesting because I was like, okay, this is like, I need to find a way to fit into this, you know, right now, like in front of this
Yeah.
audience.
Yeah.
And so that was really good for me to do. And I love doing, I would like to do more of it. I mean, but I think to be totally successful at it, I would need to like 100% commit to how out of control it would be. And I think there's still a part of me that, like a professionalism part of me, that feels like I have to fulfill a more general brief, musical brief, in order to, you know, do my job.
Mm.
And so until I'm 100% able to let go of that, then I don't know if I'd feel like you're getting the guy you hear on those records. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, this is total, like, I'm being honest here.
Mm.
Like, and maybe it's an unrealistic expectation that like that should even be the same person, you know,
Mm.
or that I'd ever be able to do that, because
Hmm.
what I do in here is really weird and personal, and in a lot of ways bears little relationship to what you could maybe do with a band, you know, who's playing tunes. I don't know. I
Mm.
don't have many opportunities to like find that out.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe like if I'm lucky enough to live long enough to keep doing this, there'll be a day when like I show up at a gig like that and I'm just like, okay, it's like the same as being here, just like
Yeah.
do what I do.
Mm.
And and from my perspective, it's totally successful.
Mm.
Um, I don't think that was my impression on, like, for me personally on that gig, because I just felt like I didn't know how to commit to that mindset, because you know, I wanted to like be able to hang also,
Mm.
you know what I mean? And Jorge is, you know, I mean, he's not a drummer that he's such an incredible drummer, and he's not one that you can just like, you have to like really have it together to play with him. You know what I mean?
I
He's
was
not like
thinking,
a drummer that you can sort of passively, and I say this in, this is 100% the reason I love him as a drummer.
yeah.
And the same with people like Jeff Williams, all great drummers, you know, it's like you can't just like, they're not there to make your life easy. It's like
Hmm.
you need to be ready to play with people like that, you know.
Hmm.
And another thing that was going on was like I wasn't 100% sure that what I do in the studio prepared me to play with Jorge Rossi. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's like deep. What, and I don't mind admitting that. So when I heard that, I listened to that recording once and I was just like, damn, like this, like I, I sound, to me, I sounded like I would have needed like to think about how to approach that situation, like to get the most out of myself, you know,
Mm.
like, and to be able to hang in a way that felt authentic to me. I mean, this is like very honest, but I think maybe it could be helpful.
Totally. Yeah.
I think all musicians feel this way. They go through these things, you know. It's like they see themselves, and then like there's to be able to see it again, like on YouTube, and it's there, and like, and it's that, talk about vulnerable, man. Like I, like it's about being, for me, like okay with having a YouTube video up there where I'm like, in my mind, like sort of lost, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, is that okay? I don't know. Yes, it has to be, right? It has to be.
Uh-huh.
It's like we want to curate the whole thing. We want to curate, our egos want to curate the entire deal, you know, and
Mm.
have the YouTube video we like the most come up where we had creative control and it represents our thing. Like,
Mm.
that's like, we want to curate who we want to be and who we think we are, you know? And I think that control is probably, that's not, you know, that could get out of control. That need for control could get out of control.
Yeah, it won't get us
So
there.
I like
Yeah,
throwing myself into these situations because it's like the opposite of this place. You know what I
yeah.
mean? It's the opposite, and I need that. That really, that's part of what fuels me in what I do here, is like having that sense of like unknowing and insecurity, and it just lets me check in with all that lack of control, which I want to be in touch with, because it's too comfortable here and here sometimes, you
Man, that's the
know.
reason I started doing this concert series because I had been and still I'm still working with the guys I connected with when I was studying, which is my trio, and now it has been together for 15 years. So I think it was in 2017. So that's 11 years into playing with the same guys as my main thing, which was also the thing that was really keeping me busy, which was my own thing. Um, I wanted to have something, I was, you know, um, how should I say, quite successful with the trio, which meant we were playing a lot, which meant I wasn't playing as much with other people, which was kind of the downside of being successful with one thing. And, which I was super and still am super thankful, but I wanted to have the opportunity to play with others and to have, because I like this moment of having a first meeting with somebody. Um, Having the moment where because everybody's so attentive and everybody's so watching out for everyone, making everybody feel comfortable. And there's a vulnerability in that too, I feel, where everybody is like, yeah, I don't know, how did he mean this note? You're listening very, very very, very, yeah, closely. And so this is why I started the concert series, to have the in a way, my trio is your studio. It's similar. It feels very, very close and very, very secure also, and very comfortable and very familiar. Although we're stretching out, we're looking for new stuff when we play. But this concert series was always about putting people together that haven't played as much together or haven't played at all together, having a new repertoire each time. And I've learned so much doing these concerts in a row, because whenever then I listen back to the recording, I feel like, oh man, you should have done less, or you should have helped more, or you should have, how can I make this situation, which is new for other people as well, how can I make it more easy for them, or how can I make it more exciting for them, or whatever. So for you, that video that is up there, it feels that way, but for me it feels so great how you play in this moment, to see you in this moment, because I love all your work. I love your music, but to see you in this context just gives another perspective for me that is so interesting to have on top of your work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, like I say, I mean, I think the ideal is just that, like, it's not about me, you know.
Mm,
it really isn't. I mean, I spent so much time, especially when I was trying to play jazz and trying to feel legit as a jazz musician. Like nearly every experience would be the subject of some deep criticism on my part, and um, and unfortunately, I think the default became to like engage other people, the other band members, and probably the audience too in that criticism. You
Mm.
know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
so you like, I'm not the only one, and I unfortunately I think I learned that from other jazz musicians. A certain you know when it's like, and I like it's actually interesting. Once I played a gig, and a friend of mine who's not a musician, she's in like more uh, theatrical performance and experimental performance art. And I played this gig, and afterwards she was like, "Oh, I love that, whatever. This was really good." And I was like, "Oh, whatever, like dark, like
Yeah.
I didn't think that was, I didn't play very well, blah blah blah." And her thing was kind of like, "How dare you?"
Yeah.
She,
Yeah.
and that really actually blew my mind, because I was like, "Oh yeah, like who am I to like bring her into that shit? Like
Yeah.
that's
Right.
nothing to do with her.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with me. Like why am I bringing her into this thing?" It's like, if I need to go through that, whatever, it's like I'll take that here. Maybe I'll talk about it with like another musician who I trust.
Yeah.
And if it's a band, I suppose you could have a conversation with the band and that could be productive. What happened there? But that can get out of control too. What just happened? It's like, who cares? It happened. It's like, it's over.
Yeah.
If we need to sort that out, we'll do it on the next gig.
Mm.
Uh, or on the next gig or in whatever. But it's like this critical process is so ego driven, I think. And I think it could be like, if you don't let people know that you endorse it, then maybe it opens up the space where it's okay for it not to be good because it's not good. I mean, who wants to pay for that?
Yeah.
It's like, if you can't at least pretend to commit to what you've done,
Mm.
like as part of the performance, even,
Yeah.
as part of the performance, be like, yeah, that's what I do.
Mm.
I hope you liked it.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't like it, I'm sorry, that's not your thing.
Yeah.
But to be like, oh man, that was probably shitty, right? Like, so if you didn't like it, like, I know that already. It's no news to me.
You're
If you
putting
thought it
down
was
somebody
bad, it's
else's.
like, I know.
Yeah. I want to talk about your harmonic language because it seems very, very, yeah, it seems very, very you. And right from the start, from your first record, it's like it's there. And over the course of all these other records, and also Portals, what a great record, man. Sorry, um,
Uh,
just listen to that this morning, and it's also so you, and it's so connected also to horses in a way, and to that harmonic language. And I'm wondering where this came from, and how you, yeah, what you kind of gravitate towards.
Harmony, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I wish I had something organized to tell you about that. I just, it's, I don't have an approach. It's so much trial and error, because I'm not a pianist, you see. So it's like a lot of times I'm aware of what's going on when I'm playing piano. Um, but a lot of it is a surprise to me,
Hmm. So
Yeah.
you arrive at
And
something and then
work,
you go like, oh, what's this? How did I
mm,
come here?
yeah, or I might not even, yeah, sometimes that what's this moment, sometimes that's not there either.
Hmm.
Because because a lot of it is I don't know what it is, you know. Like for example, this chord. I wonder if you'll be able to hear it.
Yeah. It reminds me of
So it's
this.
like a major. It's just like a sus chord that also has a major third and a major seventh.
Yeah.
I
Was
mean,
it?
I've never known how to write that. That's a good example of something that, like, when I start thinking about what is this, it's like, it's kind of like everything at the same time, you know.
It reminds me of that one song of yours. Is it on Rainbow?
It's on everything. Yeah,
You
I
know?
mean that. Yeah, I use that chord a lot. I mean, but it's a good example of something that's just like, it's not from any sort of, it's just like a mistake kind of that is formalized for me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say the majority of my harmony is like that, you know. It's by ear.
Yeah.
And so I can't really generalize about how I get to it, or where, or I can't sort of analyze it. I mean, one thing I can say is my sense of how I want to use harmony is getting simpler and simpler the more I make music. That's for sure. Now I'm very interested in triads.
Yeah.
I mean, on reality, there's basically no seventh chords, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested. I like triads and I like inversions. And now that I'm learning guitar, like even more so, like,
Mm.
you know, I'm at this point, I feel like I can get a lot of mileage over very small chord shapes, you know,
Mm.
but with not much information on them, you know. So that's kind of where I'm at with harmony now. But like, for me, harmony is like the harmonic aspect of music is like where it starts to take me into like moods, or like different spaces, you know. That's what I like when I really get like lit up by music. It's almost always a harmonic thing,
Mm-hmm.
because it just feels like it puts me in a place that's like different to this world. That's always a harmonic thing. Melody feels more bound to this world, like, because it's linguistic in a way. So like
Mm-hmm.
the melodic music I love, you know, it's like, you know, like Ornette, like
Yeah.
that's like a person thing. Like I love that person who's speaking those melodies, you know. But with harmony, it's like there's no people there. It's like a planet. It's like a different world, you know. That's where I get when I like find something. That's where I want to get with music, like through harmony, is like kind of create a space that's unfamiliar, you know.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, it's sort of something you can do with chords in a weird way. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, you know. So all the composers I love, I feel like, are the ones who do that, you know, with chords.
Mm. You posted a playlist of certain kinds of music.
Yeah, the
That
10 seconds.
Man, that was so deep. I was really
Isn't
into.
that a cool exercise? Yeah.
It's really cool. It's really cool. And there was a lot of music that I knew already, but there was also a lot of music that I haven't heard before,
Oh,
and it
really?
was really inspiring for me. And that was actually, yeah, you just touched on something that I wanted to talk to you about, because all of these examples had something in common, and
Yeah.
I couldn't put it into words, but I was it made me want to ask you what you're looking for in music,
Oh, yeah. Good
because
question. What am I looking for?
there's obviously a lot of things that we look for in music, but it seems like
Mm,
there was something that connected them all, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
I wonder what that was. I don't know. I mean, when I was writing about them, the thing I kept returning to, because it was a 10-second thing. He's like, George is like, 10 seconds. It's like, okay, if it's going to be 10 seconds, then it will probably be this like really energetic 10 seconds. On some level, it's going to be energetic, because you probably wouldn't pick 10 seconds that are sort of like nothing happening, you know? So a lot of them were like climactic, but not all, you know, I guess
Yeah.
not all. I think all of those moments were like moments when it's just like like when I'm listening and it gets to a point in something where like it feels like it's just, there's nothing that could explain it, but it's like you're out of yourself basically. Like it's like ecstatic, or it's it transports me. All of those moments, I was basically organizing that playlist around moments like that. And I can remember almost all of them, like the time when I first heard it and had that feeling.
Yeah, me too. I love
It's
these moments.
unforgettable. Yeah, it's unforgettable. And it's totally permanent, because every time I hear that stuff, it's the same. Like when I was making that playlist, I was just as lit up by those 10 seconds as I was the first time I heard them. Like, you know, I put on that Skies of America, that part of the Ornette record, when he plays for the first time. I remember listening to that in Bill McHenry's house. That was his record. The first time I heard that, I was like shocked and terrified, like by how alien I felt, like, and how disoriented I was. And it still that part of that record still feels that way, you know?
Yeah.
Still feels that way. And the Coltrane on Softly as a Morning Sunrise, when McCoy's been playing for a while, and then and Coltrane comes in to play for the first time. Again, it's like I had a tape, my second jazz tape, the best of John Coltrane, and that track was maybe even the first one, and it was McCoy for ages playing solo, and then Elvin just like builds up to that moment, and it's like it feels like a sort of like some kind of the universe is forming in that moment or something. It's so cosmic, you know? I mean, that word is so overused, but by cosmic, I mean, it's like the the largest scale energy ever, you know?
Yeah.
Those guys like create that. And it's not just them, it's like the sound of that recording too, how distorted it is. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of that is about energy, you know? And then Milton Nascimento, same thing. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many moments on that record that are just like, where am I? Like,
Yeah.
this is not reality, you know?
Yeah.
But it is. It's like the most intense reality. So I think the music I gravitate toward, it all on some level or another has that. And like, you know, that's got to be like, for me, the guiding thing, you know? I mean, you can't get too crazy with that, because then you get like a fiend and you're like, you sort of reject music that doesn't give you that feeling. And that's kind of a desperate place to be. Like, I also like listening to music cold and being like, this is making me feel nothing, but it's like still kind of lighting me up. Like Tristano's kind of like that for me. Like when I listen to Tristano, I'm like so removed, but also like so deeply affected on some level, you know. It's so heavy, like, but it would never really make me feel that feeling I was describing before. I
Yeah.
like both, you know. I like both.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. My daughter's been getting me into the Beatles again, and like, because that's like my root, like that's my first music, and this, and She Loves You, the most obvious Beatles
Yeah.
song, you know. That's like the best Beatles song. It's so deep. It is
Yeah.
so deep, and it's like too bright. It's like the sun. Like you can't see it. It's
Yeah.
too big. So you'd miss it because it's too obvious, you know. So it can go the other way as well. Yeah.